So, let's actually talk about Karma. Karma is Stray Kids' fourth full Korean album, and I have thoughts. You might have seen my quick PSA video right after the release where I commented on the online coverage and the immediate defensiveness from stays, but I didn't actually review the album itself or share my personal feelings about it. From the tone in that video, it's obvious that while I was trying to validate everyone's experience, I am biased, because yes, I actually liked it. With the exception of 2 tracks, Mess and In My Head, I enjoyed Karma, but it isn't without its problems. While I disagree with people calling it a bad album, it is, without a doubt, Stray Kids' weakest full album to date, by a landslide. The reasons for this can be summed up simply. Karma is a throwback album, and it sucks. I'll also touch on my real issue with the Karma era, the physical album itself. But first, let's break down why exactly Karma sits in such an awkward spot, why I enjoyed it, but I also walked away thinking that it was only a 6.5 out of 10 at best. So I figured the best place to start is the track list, starting with our album opener, Bleep. If there's anything on this album that feels closest to modern-day Stray Kids, it's the intro track, Bleep. Ever since No Easy, Stray Kids have had a pattern of opening their albums with songs that are absolutely nuclear, only for the rest of the track list to never really match that level of intensity. Now, I don't mean that in terms of quality, but in tone. Bleep is satisfyingly intense and unapologetic, but the 10 tracks that follow carry none of the same momentum. That's why I feel like Bleep doesn't really serve its purpose as an opener, opposed to other such examples. Intro tracks are supposed to set the stage for what's ahead, but here it almost tricks you into thinking the whole album will sound like this. It doesn't. Instead, Bleep exists in a lane of its own, a pissed-off cinematic boom-bap track that kicks the door open before the album completely pivots. Still, I can't say that I don't love it. It scratches that itch for Stray Kids' maximalistic, chaotic energy in a way that nothing else on the record does. The best way I can describe it is cheese, but without the jokes, and way more pissed off. It's raw, explosive, and honestly one of the few moments here that really feel like the Stray Kids I've come to expect in recent years, even if the album around it doesn't keep up. Next we have Ceremony. Now, this is truly one of the most unique tracks in Stray Kids' entire discography. I honestly can't think of another song quite like it. It's also the track that earned the most amount of ire when the album dropped. And honestly, I get it. Stray Kids have never been an easily digestible group, but 8 years in, it still surprises me that people haven't figured that out. Now, even though I enjoy it, I won't pretend that it's flawless. My biggest gripe is, unexpectedly, how empty it feels. Especially for Stray Kids, who are known for their over-the-top, maximalistic production that I just prided them on, Ceremony feels weirdly stripped back. When I compare it to something like my favorite title track, S-Class, the difference is obvious. S-Class is messy and overwhelming in the best possible way, whereas Ceremony feels dumbed down to the point where I struggle to see the vision behind it. It's toned down so much that it doesn't quite feel like Stray Kids anymore. That being said, the festival version completely fixes the problem for me. The energy, the message, the whole intended aesthetic come through so much clearer there. I get why the festival version wouldn't work as a title track, it's just too chaotic and maybe too club-oriented, but it's exactly the vision I wanted to see in the main cut. The original Ceremony is interesting and bold, but the festival version is the only one that actually makes sense to me. After that, we have our third track in Creed. Creed is a trap track that honestly feels like it could have been pulled out of the Go Live era. The tone is a bit darker than what Stray Kids usually lean into, but the subject matter isn't surprising at all. It's the group proclaiming their core principles, the same ones that they've been shouting out since debut, sticking to their own path, refusing the easy way out, and holding on to their values no matter what. As a song, it is intoxicating. The beat is heavy and hypnotic, the kind of trap production Stray Kids have always thrived on. The chorus does ride on the line of being repetitive, maybe even a little bit too much, but the verses completely make up for it. Hyunjin, Han, and Changbin absolutely go off here. Creed has that kind of sharp, interesting delivery that originally set Stray Kids apart, and hearing it again feels like a revival of something that's been missing from their past couple of mini-albums. Now, we come across my first skip, which is Mess. This is a rare miss for Han, at least in my opinion. It falls into that category the fandom likes to call Han Pop, emotional, hip-hop leaning tracks with a moody edge, but this is the first one in a long while that just doesn't land for me. Structurally, it's an emo-inspired track with a guitar line layered on top of a hip-hop beat, which on paper sounds like a perfect fit for Stray Kids. The problem for me comes down to the autotune. Stray Kids aren't strangers to it. In fact, they've practically mastered the art of drenching a song in autotune while still using it to amplify the emotion. Some of my favorite tracks like this are Miserable, Gone Days, and yes, even Creed. These tracks prove how effective those approaches can be, but with Mess, it feels like the opposite. This is a song that's supposed to be raw and soulful, but the heavy effects strip away the texture that could have made it hit harder. I honestly think Mess would have benefited from pulling back on the polish, letting us hear the members a little bit more unfiltered, or at least as unfiltered as Stray Kids will ever allow themselves to be. As it stands, the emotion doesn't fully come through, which makes the track feel less impactful than it should. And yes, we arrive at yet another skip. In My Head is unfortunately a track that will just never work for me. From what I've seen, people tend to fall into two camps with this one. Either they absolutely hate it, or they love it with their whole chest. Honestly, the reaction makes sense because it all comes down to how you feel about pop rock as a genre. I've always had a motto to never say never. Wow, I guess that's now a Zero Base One reference. Because exceptions do happen. Sometimes a song outside of my usual taste sneaks in and wins me over, but In My Head is not that exception. In fact, it tilts more to being outright annoying the more I hear it. The production choices lean into the most obvious, almost cartoonish version of pop rock, and instead of sounding refreshing or playful, it just grates on me. Sorry to all the In My Head lovers out there. It just ain't for me. Next we have Halftime. This track is the quintessential Stray Kids song. A Stray Kids album without a track like this just wouldn't feel complete. It's safe to say that this is my favorite song off the album, and I haven't seen anyone hating on it. If those people exist, no need to tell me. It's an anthemic EDM track led by pulsing bass, built around the idea that the game isn't over yet. Shocker, I know. The pre-chorus features a melody that is extremely reminiscent of Case 143, a callback that is anything but accidental. I'm sure you've noticed by this point that I keep making references back to older Stray Kids songs, and that's amounting to my thesis, but on that note, there's a weird phenomenon in K-pop where companies lean on past notable tracks later in a group's career, usually when the group's peak has passed and creativity is in decline. This is not the case with Stray Kids, so seeing these constant reminders across this album is confusing. The possibilities are endless. Maybe it's a creative drought. Maybe they're pushing after an emotional note, since enlistments are upcoming for Stray Kids. Or maybe there's behind-the-scenes pressure to push out music faster, which results in more repetitive songs. Whatever the reason, it's unnecessary. Now, I put these next two tracks together because they feel like two sides of the same coin, and honestly, my feelings about them are basically the same. Phoenix and Ghost are both built on heavy synths, heavy bass, and heavy emotional lyrics. They remind me a lot of Starlost or Placebo, simultaneously on the production side of things. Now, Phoenix is the more overtly triumphant of the pair. It is an EDM banger all about rebirth, meanwhile Ghost takes that same intensity but flips it inward, and more insecurely. Together, they balance each other out, but they also stand in contrast with the tracks that preceded them. The braggadocious in-your-face tracks versus the emotional introspective ones, which is a combination no Stray Kids release is complete without. That said, there is a conflict I continue to be unable to shake. The production on both tracks leans heavily on past Stray Kids styles, like I alluded to, that the group has long since evolved from. Yet, the fact that these sounds are resurfacing 2 or 3 years later is confusing. I can't deny that I enjoy these tracks. I love Phoenix and Ghost, but there's simultaneously an appreciation and a grudge coexisting in my reaction. Part nostalgia and part why now? That makes me nervous in a way that I can't ignore. And finally, 0801 is one of the more sentimental tracks on Karma. The title is a reference to August 1st, the day Stay, their official fandom, was revealed, making the song a direct tribute to their fans. It has another one of those past references tucked into the lyrics, this time in the simple line, "You're doing great." For anyone who doesn't know the context, it might just pass by as a casual lyric, but for those in the know, the intonation and delivery is marked in every Stay who heard it for the first time in the track Grow Up. That said, this is very much a fan service song. It's heartfelt, yes, and it admittedly pulls on the heartstrings, but objectively is not doing anything particularly groundbreaking musically. It's gentle, straightforward, and safe. A nice moment of warmth at the end of the album, but ultimately that's all it is. Now, of course, there are 2 more tracks on this album, Ceremony Festival version and Ceremony English versions, but do I really need to say anything for these 2? Okay, so it sounds like I like the tracks, so what's the problem? Well, to start with the obvious, Karma is only 9 songs. You would be forgiven for thinking it was actually 11 songs, given that it's listed everywhere as such, but the tracklist includes what many of their other mini-albums include: a festival version of the title track, and more recently, an English version of Ceremony. In the past, I've praised Stray Kids for their festival versions of title tracks. I like them a lot, oftentimes more than the original version. However, those instances have always been in mini-albums, and never counted toward the tracklist's total. Meaning that while Stray Kids mini-albums have always and forever been 6 tracks, technically 7 with an added intro track, but that has since been replaced with the festival versions. The inclusion of the festival version would make it 7, not that one of those 6 spots would be dedicated to an alternate version of the title track. Even when they've released Korean versions of Japanese releases in their mini-albums, they didn't count towards the 6. Like with the Rockstar album. Having those iterations on the mini-albums have always been an addition and never counted toward the album's total, and yet with Karma, valuable slots that could have been saved for actual runtime to flesh out the album were instead dedicated to redundancy. In truth, Stray Kids' full albums have been declining in the literal sense. Go Live had 14 tracks, In Life, while a repackage, had 17, Noeasy had 14, 5 Star had 12, and now Karma has 11, albeit 3 of those 11 tracks are the same song. To state the obvious, there is no hard and fast rule for the number of tracks on a full album. While I noticed this trend before, it didn't bother me personally. Just because an album has more tracks doesn't necessarily make it better. 5 Star is actually my favorite out of all of Stray Kids' albums, and I consider it to be their best full-length project. But that's another video for another day. It does say something, however, when you factor in the sharp decrease in the number of tracks and their method for compensating for that. It seemed to me that the tracks they had ready for this album accounted for 9, and they tried placating listeners with different versions of Ceremony so that the decline from 14 to 12 to 11 didn't seem so disconcerting, when it's actually 14 tracks to 9. So something I touched briefly on in my PSA video was the derivative discussion that often surrounds Stray Kids' music. If you were to believe the discourse online, you'd think Stray Kids have been falling off perpetually since God's Menu. After Thunderous, after Maniac, after S-Class, you get the idea. Despite the apparent certainty that Stray Kids have fallen off musically, no one can decide when it happened. The only consistent narrative is that Stray Kids were good at some ambiguous point in time and fell off at another equally ambiguous point in time later in their career. These are the people who constantly cry out for early Stray Kids, when they were good, when everyone loved their music. I'm here to tell you, that never happened. Sure, there have been moments where Stray Kids received less hate for music they put out, but there has never been a point in their career when they were unanimously praised for making exactly the music they wanted to. The closest we ever got to that is God's Menu and maybe My Pace. And even then, the best we got was silence from naysayers. I find it funniest when people point to their debut, District 9, or Side Effects, or Double Nut, or Miro, and either misremember the environment surrounding Stray Kids at the time, or simply weren't there, assuming there was some fantasy era where Stray Kids were ever universally loved for their output. It's only in reflection, after years, that the songs like the ones I listed have garnered any love or respect. At the time of their release, they were ridiculed for the same things Stray Kids are now being accused of when people claim their music quality has declined. Before Karma came out, there was an argument to be made that if Stray Kids simply reverted back to an era that mirrored those earlier years, they'd be in a better place artistically, that a return to form was the right move. Karma proved that assertion wrong. Stray Kids' early releases, while they hold a special place in my heart, don't come close to surpassing their more recent work. Personally, I think the only reason people claim Stray Kids were better in some mystical past is nostalgia, and I say that as a long-time stay. Now, by me saying this, I am in no way asserting that your opinion that early Stray Kids was better than it is now is incorrect. What I am saying is that since Stray Kids have kind of reverted to their more earlier phase in their career with Karma, the reaction is the same. There's no difference. Despite the fact that people have been pleading for them to go backwards, and they have with this release, it's not any better. And it's certainly not any better than the more recent albums they've put out. Now, every year, for whatever reason, my brain has a sudden urge to revisit my favorite artists' discographies. I'll listen from start to finish through all of their records, Stray Kids included, to refresh myself. It lets me benchmark how my taste has changed, and more importantly, decide if the projects I once loved have aged well, and if I still like them after learning more about music. And spoiler, I have some not nice things to say about Stray Kids. To state the obvious, I haven't come to outright hate any of Stray Kids' older work, but with more experience, it's clear just how inexperienced they were. Production-wise, structurally, and conceptually. Stray Kids' early music, while important for establishing their identity, was undeniably limited. The production was rudimentary, the melodies often simplistic, and while the songs were more digestible, they sometimes veered into generic territory. None of these things are necessarily bad. In fact, it's actually quite expected for a new artist to go through these phases. And so, because of that, much of their early output wasn't especially memorable beyond the novelty of being new artists finding their footing. To avoid stretching this section out any longer, I'll use a singular example. Helevator. For two reasons. First, it's their first song, like pre-debut even. Second, they've made updated renditions of it for their tour set lists that explicitly demonstrate how much better they've gotten at their craft. As a pre-debut statement, Helevator was raw, scrappy, and fitting. The lyrics leaned heavily into the trope of struggle and perseverance, which was fitting for rookies, but not exactly distinct. The production itself hasn't aged well either. It's thin, built around a dated EDM trap drop that sounded trendy in 2017 but feels hollow now, especially compared to the layered maximalistic sound they're known for today. Even the vocal and rap lines, while heartfelt, were straightforward and kinda one-dimensional, a reflection of a group that hadn't yet found its signature style. But when they revisit Helevator in concert now, it lands completely differently. The arrangement is much fuller, the bass hits harder, and the members themselves have grown so much that they can sell the song with confidence rather than the childish tone and skill that embodied them as teenagers. They adapted the proper pace, no pun intended, of a song by incorporated tension and release. There's build-up now, without the drop climaxing into a gamer YouTube intro and rather into a soaring anthem. But more importantly, and why I thought this was a point to make at all, is that Karma is very much touching back to a time of their own. A time when their music was more simplistic, minimal, by Stray Kids standards, and reliant on a cleaner, stripped-down style. Like, I want you to look me in the eye and tell me that Phoenix and Ghost don't belong on I Am Who or I Am You. I'll wait. Karma is a callback to an older Stray Kids. Simpler, more atmospheric, more focused on one idea rather than the maximalistic layering that we've gotten used to over the years. And in a way, it proves a point. People who spent years begging for old Stray Kids finally got what they asked for, but the reaction hasn't been any kinder. The same criticisms. Too noisy, too messy, too repetitive. And you might say, well, then they probably haven't gone back farther enough. But the issue is that those same songs that people tout as being Stray Kids' peak were also criticized for being too noisy, too messy, too repetitive. The same labels are being thrown around, showing that this fantasy of a golden era Stray Kids never really existed. And here's the other side of the coin. While I enjoyed Karma to an extent, I can't pretend it didn't feel like filler, which is a first for me. For fans like me, who have grown attached to Stray Kids' evolution, this return to something more minimal can feel empty. It's not that Karma is bad, but it highlights why nostalgia is a trap. The old formula wasn't unanimously loved the first time around, and going back to it now only risks alienating the people who've embraced how far they've come. So, before Karma released, Stray Kids had been busy promoting their Japanese EP, Hollow, and separately putting out a digital project called the Dominate Mixtape. The 4 songs on that project ended up being a part of some tour dates on the Dominate tour. For anyone following Stray Kids closely, this was quite unusual. Stray Kids have had a long history of releasing what fans call skiz records or skids players, tracks that the members work on by themselves or with 1 or 2 other members that aren't officially released. These songs often started out on YouTube before eventually appearing on Spotify years later. But the Dominate EP was different. All 4 unit tracks were released digitally on their own. At the time, it seemed like a nice idea, giving fans access to new music quickly. In retrospect, though, it doesn't feel thought out in the context of the album flow or cohesion. When I discussed Stray Kids' older full-length albums, I didn't mention that unit tracks usually made up for the last few songs on the record, the ones missing from Karma. That's normal for a full album, or at least the ones that I've listened to. But Karma was the first time this trend was absent, and it wasn't replaced with more full group tracks, like with 5 Star. And here's what the Dominate EP comes in. If you slot those 4 tracks in after 0801, it actually fixes both issues. The album feels more complete, more fleshed out, and the length problem is mostly solved. I even tried it as an experiment. Listen to Karma normally and then pivot to the Dominate EP tracks after 0801. Honestly, the experience as album feels way more satisfying, and it feels closer to the product that Stray Kids usually gives us. Now, I'm not saying that simply doing this would have fixed all of my issues with this particular album. Even with inserting those songs, Karma still feels like a throwback album, but it would have at least been a more complete project. Whereas with the current version we have now, kinda leaves me hanging after the 9th track. While I don't agree with the sentiment that Stray Kids albums have been declining in musical quality, I can absolutely attest to the fact that their physical albums have. This isn't something I would normally bring up, even if it's a grievance I've had for a while, because it just doesn't seem like the type of thing a lot of K-tubers talk about. But Stray Kids' physical albums, the literal albums, have reached a new low with Karma. To be clear, there was never a time when they were great. I know that Stray Kids' sister group Twice is often touted for their earlier albums having photo cards galore. Newer groups since then may have had fewer photo cards, but they've made up for it by introducing and innovating inclusions. When it comes to Stray Kids, it's always been pretty bare bones. For the longest time, they would release 2, maybe 3 versions, plus a 4th limited version that couldn't be bought after pre-orders. Inside those pages would be the CD, obviously, the photo book, 2 photo cards, and another random ever-changing bonus, like a bookmark or a slightly larger photo card. I was placated as a newer fan when I first got these albums, but as the years went on, it became clear how uninteresting these were in the long run. Not to mention, I don't care for photo cards. I always end up selling them and then making my own for cheap. Listen, I already participate in the consumerist hellscape that is K-pop. You are not going to convince me to buy photo cards for like $15, $20, hell, $50. No way in hell. Anyway, to get back on track. This was all fine and dandy until Rockstar. That was the start of the end. I will reiterate before continuing, Stray Kids' physical albums were never that awe-inspiring. They've gone from slim but still firm photo books during the first 6 mini albums, I think, to outright box designs, from Go Live to Ordinary, to what I would consider the peak of Stray Kids design in the form of a hardbook photo book, and then Rockstar, which was a little better than a paper pamphlet that was quite literally stapled together. No, I am not joking. The state of Stray Kids physical albums momentarily got better with 5 Star and 8, with, I kid you not, smaller paper boxes. Genius move, I know. But they have, as I've said, reached a new low with Karma. Not only is the design boring, the quality is garbage, and it didn't even survive the postal trip to my home. Despite wanting to keep the album on my shelf, or just cut it up and scrapbook it like I do with so many others, I physically couldn't because of how fragile the box was and the damage it already had. I threw it away as soon as I got it, keeping the inclusions, of course. The sum of which was equally disappointing. I'm sure stays already know what I'm about to say, but the bracelets. The goddamn bracelets. As Stray Kids does with every release, they tease the physical album and the goodies inside ahead of time. Many, including myself, were excited to see that bracelets were to be included in the Karma album. Listen, I know how bare bones this is because I've seen other K-pop groups include, like, CD players and other much more interesting merchandise, but, like, this is all we had. Some of us cheered, some of us cried, all of us were happy. That is, until I got the damn thing in the mail. Imagine my surprise when I opened the album and realized that the only decent inclusion was made out of paper. The bracelet didn't survive a day. I realized that this section might come across a bit random and perhaps out of left field. Even more so for people that don't have a vested interest in the physical albums and whatever lackluster items might be inside of them. And I'll admit, this is purely a personal interest of mine that I felt was important enough to mention at all. While I don't generally have a collector mindset, I do like using the merch that I buy from any sort of franchise and turning it into something of my own. I brought up briefly how I like scrapbooking, and that's undeniably a part of my frustration. While I keep an album or two of each release for display, most of it, if not all, ends up ripped apart and mended into something I believe is more useful, a wonderful mesh of my personal creativity and my favorite artists' work. And no, it's not the end of the world if Stray Kids' physical albums aren't up to par with others, but it does say something about the fact that Stray Kids, while not the biggest group out of JYP, is still a substantial part of their brand, and still gives their fans basically junk. JYP Entertainment gave me something to throw away, which is especially ironic when you consider that in 2023, JYP himself set forth plans for a green initiative, planning to completely remove physical albums from the equation altogether and only sell digital ones. A plan that obviously fell through. As someone who does care about this part of the K-pop experience, I don't think I'm asking too much. Just an album with a good design. The limited edition album was good though. That was much better than the normal ones. At the end of the day, Karma is a decent album with flaws that stem not so much from any technical part of it falling short of my expectations, but rather a revival of which I thought was behind them. I speculated before that burnout was the reason for the seeming regression they've made, and while that certainly may be a part of it with the constant touring and releases, I think Karma was also a confirmation of themselves, their music, and what the future will look like for them. That said, I don't think it's wrong to point out where it falls short. It has a runtime that doesn't allow for ideas to stay and flesh themselves out. The absence of unit tracks or just more songs in general leaves the back half feeling lighter than it should, and the physical album was a complete letdown. For a group this established, I expected more. Not because I want to nitpick, but because I know they're capable of delivering more. At the same time, I would be lying if I said that I didn't fuck with the album. For all of its faults, Creed, Bleep, Phoenix, and Halftime are certified bangers in my book. the other tracks following are not that far behind. And yes, I do still have love for the festival versions of Ceremony in particular. What Karma really showed me, though, is that Stray Kids are at a crossroads with how they want to present themselves as a group. On one hand, they're still experimenting this many years into their career with different genres like drill, dubstep, and even Bollywood music with the title track. On the other hand, they're tied to an image and sound that supposed fans of their versatility won't let them grow or expand out of. To not like the direction Stray Kids is going in is one thing, and I'm not here to police you whether you do or don't like something. But Stray Kids as artists have never set the expectation for themselves that they'll stay in one place for too long, nor will they abide by what others want from them. I mean, they holler about it enough in their songs, you think some people would get the point by now. Anyway, that'll be it from me for now. See y'all next time. Bye bye.